Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Grace of a Military Child in Life podcast. Military families are not like your traditional family. They are strong, brave, resilient, and some of the most incredible people I know. My name is Gracie, a U.S. Army brat, and I am your host. I am honored to be able to give military family members like myself a place for them to share their stories and experiences in the military life. Stay tuned for this week's guest. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of Grace of Military Child in Life. Today, I'm here with Pat, who is an Air Force child. So, Pat, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me, Gracie. I am doing real well, and I'm very excited to talk about my experience, even though I feel like since it was so long ago, it was more like a history lesson than just, my childhood.
Yeah,
it was in the early 60s, really. 1960s.
Yeah. No, I'm absolutely looking forward to hearing more about that. So why don't you just kind of tell us what it was like growing up as a military child?
Well, for all the military children, this, isn't new to them, but it was, there's always change. And I feel that the kids have to learn how to, my brothers and I, my three brothers and I, had to learn how to be flexible and go with the flow. It was always interesting, not always great, but even not when it wasn't great, it was still interesting because we had learning experiences. So my dad was in the Air Force when I was born. So right off the bat, I was born into the military, and I almost feel like I was in the military, even though I was just the child, but it's the whole lifestyle that you're in. So you kind of get that mindset of being in the military. So I never felt the need as an adult to join the military. I already feel like I had done my time, So, so then I was born in the mid 50s, 1950s, and my dad had just enrolled in the military, so he was in for 20 years. So I spent my whole childhood, and my brothers had most of their childhood in it. It was exciting. We went to different places. We went to Germany for 3 years. We went to England for 3 years. And then throughout the United States, we lived in different states like North Carolina and California, Missouri, New Jersey. That might have been it, but it was just, I think I learned so much more than I ever would have learned being in one town. Like I learned about down south being, with a Southern accent. You pick up a little bit of that wherever you are. So learning about the South and the chicken and dumplings, and then even England, kind of picking up the English accent. So we became really flexible and versatile as kids.
Yeah.
So I really liked it.
It's definitely fun. And you get, like you said, you kind of get a piece of every single culture that you experience within you. And especially when you have the opportunities to move overseas, and I never did, but I have had the opportunity to travel overseas. And so being overseas, you get a whole new culture, but then also, you get the cultures within the United States. So the South Coast, the East Coast, the West Coast, the North, Midwest, everything in between. And it's really cool, and it makes some really well-rounded individuals out of it.
I think so. And it's, you think of this as one country, but it's so big that living in one part of it and living in the North and then going to the South, you at least back then, I know things could be very different, but back in the 1960s, it almost was like being in another country as far as culture and the ways of the state and how they did things and how they viewed things. So it was always interesting, and usually we would find the good parts of it.
Yeah.
I have to say that I have to give my mom all the credit for making it sort of an adventure, because she could have chosen, if she had been a different type of person, to not enjoy it. And that means if mom doesn't enjoy it, the kids probably don't enjoy it. But she,
Right.
every single time we were stationed at a different Air Force base, a different state, or a different country, she made it the best adventure we could even think of. And so then us kids really enjoyed the experience, um, more than maybe some other military kids, because she was determined to make it as fun as possible and just getting the most out of it. So I really have to credit her for giving us that attitude, because I saw other friends of mine in the military children whose parents um, didn't have that attitude, and I think they were kind of unhappy with the military lifestyle, only because you make friends and then you're kind of torn away, and then you make friends and you're torn away, and after a while it's very hard on the heart. So um, you have to be determined, and my mom was. So I have to shout out for her for that.
Yeah, I think the military spouses we are just finally starting to give that credit to, because they do so much uh,
Oh, yeah,
for the
absolutely.
families.
Well, they have to. There's not much choice. And back in the '60s, when um, the role of women was a little different, you were
Right.
supposed to be the wife and the housewife and the mother, and maybe the dad might run the family a little bit more. Um, and then all of a sudden, dad's gone. He's in a TDY for 3 months, or he's overseas, and at that time Vietnam for a year. And
Right.
then you have to be the superpower. You have to be the superhero and do everything. And then when
Yeah.
he returns, you're supposed to go back to the previous role. I don't even know how the women did it. That
Yeah.
I don't, that had to be really hard.
Yeah, because you start balancing so much, and we hear it from military spouses even currently who are trying to do everything to keep the house running, and then uh still have a relationship with their loved one who's gone, and most of them still have jobs on top of that, because the military life isn't always affordable to just have the one income. You need
Right.
multiple, so we start adding the jobs and kids on top of it, and
I
it becomes challenging.
I cannot even imagine how the wives do it. The only thing I think that helped back in the 1960s was money. It was more common for the wives to be at home, so at least the job aspect wasn't a part of it. They got to stay home, and I'm sure that was helpful. But it's still a tough. There were in other ways that made it. There were other things going on that made it tougher, and one was just because it was so long ago. There was absolutely no social media, um,
Yeah.
which you would be surprised the difference that makes. And one example would be I loved moving every single time, and the excitement of finding out what our new place was going to be like, and were we going to be living on base or off base. And a lot of times my dad would choose to live off base because of the great learning opportunities and being in the true part of the culture of Germany or England. Um, and getting the fun of all that, but and the friends. But then as you get to be more of a young teen or even a tween,
Yeah.
your friendships start to develop much stronger. And then when you have to leave, all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, here's my very good friend. Because young people make very close friendships, and you realize you have to leave them. And
Right.
then back then, when you left, you left. There wasn't a place to go to find out where they were now. There wasn't Facebook to catch up with them and find out what their new address was. You just were gone, and it was heartbreaking. So as you get to be an older teen, all of a sudden everything changes. It isn't so fun anymore. It's very, very upsetting. So I would have to say as a young kid, I loved it. And more as a teen, I started to realize like, oh, this is not so fun anymore. So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely as it's hard as, a toddler, as an infant going through this because you kind of start to sense those emotions and
mhm.
the feeling of going through this. But once you get into, uh, you know, late childhood, early teens, teenage years, you really, it really starts testing you if you can make it through this because it's so hard. And the crazy part is you only have the one choice to make it through it. Like you cannot, like there's no way out of it at this point.
Really, you can't say to mom and dad, like, I'm just going to stay here if you don't mind, and you all can go ahead. You have to
Yeah, and
go.
people have tried it. It does not work that way.
But when children become maybe 10, 11, and 12, whatever age they start to actually emotionally mature a little bit, I think they begin to feel emotions much stronger than they did as a child as far as relationships. And I think that's what makes it so hard because, as an 8-year-old, if I left my friends, that was fine because I just want to make new friends at the new Air Force Base. But, an 8-year-old's perspective is much different than a 12-year-old. So that makes all the difference.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And you start forming those relationships and you want those relationships to carry with you because you meet your best friends through this and unfortunately your best friends don't always follow with you.
but yeah, it's very hard. It was back then. I'm lucky enough that there are a couple people in my life from 50 years ago, 60 years ago, when I was a little kid, that we have been able to keep in touch, mostly because our parents kept in
That's
touch.
incredible.
And so one of my young girlfriends, I was able to find her to have her in my wedding as bridesmaid. So, the things like that meant a lot. So
Yeah.
that was cool. I wanted to bring up one thing. Being a Air Force family with my 3 brothers and I, my mom and dad, had a lot of exciting times and interesting times, and not great times. But there was one thing that went on in our family, and I honestly don't know how common it is in military families. I don't know the percentage, but I'm bringing it up just because it affected my family, and that is violence in the home,
Mm-hmm.
um, physical abuse. And that happened in our house from our father for many years. And this was the 1960s, and you couldn't do very much about it. Plus, the fact that at that time, the subject was very taboo. And even
Yeah.
as a young child, I knew enough to know that it, I could never discuss it with anybody. It was just like the family secret that this would go on sometimes with the violence. So we just had to put up with it. And thank God now things are so much different and there are outlets and ways to get help. Um, and so I just wanted, if you don't mind, I wanted to read out 2 phone numbers for people because you never know when you might find yourself in a situation and there is help. And one is called the um, National Domestic Violence Hotline, and it's 24/7. They speak 140 languages, and it is 1-800-799-7233. And the other one is called the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It's nationwide, 24/7. You can either call them, or if you don't want to actually verbally speak, you can text them and talk about it on text. And that number is just 3 numbers. It's 988. And I just wanted to bring this up for anybody who needs to hear it, just because it would have been so nice if I could have heard this little message at some point. And so now I just want to let people know it's out there. And that's really all I wanted to say about that subject. So we could go on to to happier memories for me, if you like.
Yeah, I think there's a lot about military life that you look from the outside in, and it appears to be all sunshines and rainbows. Like, oh, you get to move around, you get to do all these things. There are so many like organizations and foundations and nonprofits that are there to help you and give you things and yada yada yada. But then
Mhm.
you don't necessarily realize the struggles that military families go through. So like the struggles
Mhm.
you touched on, but then moving is hard. Going
Yeah,
through some of these emotions that as most kids you wouldn't go through, and so it's definitely a
right.
struggle then for many children to go through this, and they don't necessarily understand why. And that's the biggest thing, is once you understand why, um why your parent is doing this, why they're serving, it makes it a lot easier. But most of the time, you don't understand why until, after retirement, or, in a sense, until it's too late and, it's already been that struggle for you, and it's hard to reverse that.
Well, I don't know about families now. I'm hoping and I'm assuming there's help if you want it or need it. But back then, when I was growing up, there was no talk about why are we doing this. It was just you, as a child, like you're going to do it. There was no
Hmm.
discussion. It was just more of like, this is how it is. And I don't even think we questioned it because what choice was there? So
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like it was our attitude was different. It was accepting because there really was no other choice. We kind of just went with the flow.
Yeah, and
Um,
that's the biggest thing, is what you have to do. You have to kind of convince yourself that there is a greater purpose, even though if you don't necessarily know what that is. And I remember, growing up in the early 2000s, we always had the, okay, today's 9/11. Today we honor,
oh,
and all of that, and going through those
mhm,
motions. But then, when my dad deployed, I was like, why is he going? Where is he going? Why is he? Well, I knew where he was going. He was going to Afghanistan. But it was the,
mhm,
okay, well, why is he going? Why is
mhm.
he doing this? Why? Because we weren't necessarily in a active conflict where, we had home front battles. We didn't
Right. And
necessarily visually see it. And a lot of the kids in my classes, because I was a reserve child, a lot of the kids in my class didn't understand why my dad would be going. It was, oh, he'll come back at 6 o'clock today, like he works the normal 9 to 5. I'm like, yes, sure. He works 12-hour days in the jail when he's home, as on the special response team. That's his civilian job. However, he's doing his military job. Like, he will not be home tonight. He will be home in a year. And,
yeah.
uh,
Mhm.
we talk about 9/11. We talk about the consequences that it's had, but it's still hard for a kid to, really flip that switch to understand, oh, X, Y, and Z happened. And so now we have to do A, B, and C to combat that.
Hmm. Well, I think like I was saying with my mother, who was made everything the best she could, she might have actually gone overboard because when my father left for a year, this was during Vietnam, and
Mm-hmm.
spent a year not in Vietnam but the nearby country of Turkey. No, excuse me, it was not. It was Thailand was where he was for a year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my mom did such a good job of making it a fun thing that, oh, now we're going to live next to grandpa and grandma because we're going back to the home state that they were raised in. And we didn't have any of those questions. We just knew that we were having a good time without dad and doing
Yeah.
fun things. So we missed all that. And it's like my mother was so determined to make life the best she could. She might have overdone it with like not even mentioning. I mean, we knew where dad was and that there was a war, but I guess we were kept in the dark. Uh, because we were kind of young, and I don't know, maybe it just never occurred to us as young kids what was going on. We were just like I said, because he was occasionally violent, a year without dad was a vacation, was awesome. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, but I know for most children, it's they care a lot more about what's going on with their parents.
Yeah, and I think
Um,
like you said too earlier, touching on technology, and so we've had so many technology advances that kids nowadays are able to see so much. And because everyone is learning off of a screen and living off of a screen, it makes so much more of a difference of being able to see what's going on, see,
right.
the way of the world in a sense, and know that there's hardship out there, and
Hmm.
being able to see, okay, well, and I think I'll contribute a lot to the military children who have grown and military spouses who have seen a need for it, and began writing children's books for these kids to say, hey,
Yeah.
this is, you know, I can see my dad in this. I can see my mom in this. I can see myself in this. And I'm able to understand why, my mom or dad is going to fight,
Hmm.
for our country and for our security and freedom. And even when I was growing up, we didn't really have those books. We had the, military alphabet where you'd open it up and the first page would be like Alpha Bravo Charlie. And you're like, oh, cool. Now
Oh,
that's going to help me in my career. At least I already know
oh,
that. But,
absolutely.
it's definitely, there's so much that has changed and so much that has increased within the support for kids, for spouses and service members and families, that I think there's like so much that the support for these families are just going to keep getting bigger and bigger.
I am really, really glad to hear that it has evolved and it is like that. I honestly have no idea what it is like now because my perspective is from so many years ago. I feel that it's not it's not a real representation of what it's like. It's more of like a history lesson of things that I experienced or that were happening. And this is wonderful to hear that there's options for some kind of support. Um,
Yeah. And I think, even in the decades since, well, almost 15 years since my dad's deployment, we've seen, back then the best way to communicate with him was via email. And as a 9-year old, I did not know how to use email.
right?
Nowadays,
Yeah.
these 9-year olds know how to do way
Oh,
more
heck,
than
yeah.
email, but I didn't know how to use an email. I didn't know what an email
Hmm.
was. But then, we had Skype, but that was rare. We never even had the opportunity to Skype with my dad before his injuries. And
Oh, oh.
so Skype was just becoming a thing in
Hmm.
2011. And now we're looking at, okay, well, now I can FaceTime, with someone. I can have constant communication over text. Um, and, email is still frequently used. But
Hmm.
there are so many other forms of communication that it's incredible to see the way technology is helping to evolve things for military families. And there's some things about technology that I'm just like, okay, we can do without that, especially bringing AI in. I'm not a fan of it, but
Yeah.
there's so many things that I wish I had as a kid and that I was able to take advantage of, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, but it's really incredible to see these advancements for this next generation of military kids coming through because they're not going to have to go through some of the challenges that
Yeah.
uh, you know
So
all of these kids had to go through.
it makes me wonder if many years ago, if a soldier had to go to war for a year or so, and there really wasn't much communication, if they would be less have a not a close relationship with their parent because of it. Whereas now maybe you could keep that close relationship because of all the technology where you could keep in touch. Uh, I don't I don't know. I'm just curious. I'm thinking maybe uh, this is extremely helpful because when my dad was gone a year, he was just gone. We would get occasionally once every couple of months, we would get a big reel to reel tape. You got to remember, this is 1965 or so. So, and listen to that, and he would tell about how he was doing, what he was doing, how it was, what's going on in Thailand, and if he was able to go explore temples and whatever. So once in a while we heard something, but for the most part, and I think it really, whatever closeness we had really evaporates a bit when you don't see somebody or talk to them for a year. So
Yeah.
I would imagine this is very helpful.
Yeah, especially I've seen a lot of for infants, being born and then having a parent gone for, an extended period of time that, okay, well, we can FaceTime, maybe not every night, but every
Mhm.
once in a while and have conversations. So then that child doesn't necessarily forget the voice of his mother or father and
Mhm.
is able to keep that because, this technically starts all the way at birth. Even in pregnancy when um, I would be gone or my dad would be gone and uh then we would just be able to see my dad again and my mom would say you just jumped all around like I could just feel you
Oh,
moving like crazy because I could hear his voice again. So
oh my
even
gosh. Yeah.
even it starts in the womb and just goes on from there. So that relationship, having the technology, like I said, I didn't necessarily fully grow up with it, but being able to grow up with it from being able to have a parent's voice over the phone or a
Mhm.
recording like that being played every night or something, it's huge.
Hmm. Yeah, I honestly don't know much about that experience. I don't have much to add about that.
Yeah,
I
it's cool to see the way that things are, the direction of which things are heading.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear all of this. Um,
Yeah.
I wanted to share a couple things that happened in my childhood that were, I think, pretty interesting. And the
Yeah.
first one was in 1962 in October. I was only, I think it might have been 6 or almost 6. So I was too young, and my brothers and I were way too young to have any understanding. And we weren't even, it wasn't even discussed because we were just little kids. So I didn't know anything about this until my mother discussed it with me many, many years later. And she told me her version of all what happened. So that's what I'm going by is my mother's version. And what it was October 16th, 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis began, and it was 13 days of nuclear nervousness between our President Kennedy at the time and Russia's President Khrushchev. And Khrushchev, Russia was trying to put missiles into Cuba, and we found out through spy planes when we go over Cuba. We, meaning the United States.
Hmm.
And so that was not acceptable to President Kennedy. And we had, at the time, had our own missiles in Italy and Turkey. So President Kennedy put out a public command to President Khrushchev publicly so the world would know this, saying, this is not acceptable. You have to get the missiles out. Uh, this is something that must be done. So it was like a declaration, not a declaration of war, but a declaration of something that they felt needed to be done. And I guess President Khrushchev, did not want to appear, weak. So it was back and forth all the time between the two of them. Both of them wanting to appear the stronger leader. And so during that 13-day period, they said the world was as close to nuclear war as it has ever been. It was the closest, which I had no idea. And because we were stationed in Germany in Bitburg Air Force Base, a base that had missiles pointed at Russia because we were there as a deterrent and as a protector of the United States. Um, if war was declared, we would be one of the very first hit, and the base, would have been demolished, and we all would have been dead. It's just, and apparently the world knew this, and everybody in the United States knew this, and my relatives were just hysterical with worry, knowing that, God forbid, if there was a war, we would be the very first to go. I guess they were just frantic. And luckily, after some grandstanding, they were able to come to an agreement where Khrushchev decided not to put the missiles in. And then part of the agreement was then President Kennedy would take the missiles out of Turkey. And so they kind of each got a little bit. And it was, nuclear war was averted. But my mom tells me about this 2-week period of probably the most extreme nervousness you could have was that the Air Force Base in Bitburg had a plan. And this was their plan. Of course, all the soldiers, all the airmen would be gone. They would be at their stations prepared for war. And so there would be no men to help the wives and children. And so the wives and children were supposed to gather a few belongings, clothing and food and water, and get in their cars. And then the plan was for them to caravan one car after another out of the Air Force Base, following each other to a route. And I believe the route was going to end up at the German Sea, and then by ship escape and get somewhere safe, wherever they deemed was a safe place. But the fact that the plan was to caravan hundreds of cars through Germany, through the German countryside, was just astounding, because I don't see how it could have ever worked. We're talking 1962. The women don't really speak German. They're all supposed to be one car after another. What if one car is low on gas, or somebody has to stop and change a diaper, or somebody goes the wrong way, or there's a flat? I just see it was just been incredibly, unbelievably, it would not have worked, I don't think. And this was the only plan in place. And my mother was just frantic, knowing that this was her only hope for survival with four very small children. I cannot imagine what she must have been going through as a spouse, knowing that she might have had to do this. Right. And how insane it would have been if it had worked. Luckily, it never happened. But when she told me about it, all I could think of was like, oh my God, this was real, and I was part of it. I didn't know it at the time, but how life altering. I just wonder how that affected her. Right. Can you imagine the stress? Like, I must save my 4 babies, and we must drive. I cannot imagine. So that's one thing I wanted to bring up as just incredibly interesting, that I didn't even know happened till many years later. So that was
crazy to even think about.
I know, it's thinking like, oh my gosh, I came so close. Oh, life is crazy.
Yeah, and that's military life to a T right there. It's just crazy. Yeah, you really never know what to expect, and even as a child, you're just kind of going through the motions. You don't know what to expect, and I'm sure if your mother had said, "Hey, this is what we're doing," like, you don't bat an eye, you just go with it.
You just get in the car, okay?
Yeah, that's how you gotta go with it, because you never know what's gonna happen.
Now, another thing, because we were in Germany and in England, so my parents made the most of the opportunity by traveling with us all throughout Europe, both times, just to go places and see things, and even visit relatives from Italy that my father had. And I remember at the age of 5, this is probably the strongest memory I will ever have, the most vivid. at the age of 5, being in Italy, and we went to Pompeii, where Mount Vesuvius had a volcanic eruption. What did the date was like? 79 AD. So we're talking a long time ago. So they had discovered underground not the bodies, but the uh, the the shape of the body, the hole where the body had been, but evaporated because of the lava. So the body's gone, but under the ground there would be a hole in the shape of the body for when all the people who died in the volcano were killed either from the volcanic ashes or the gas in the air, the fumes in the air. So they would pour plaster into the hole and let it dry and then dig it out, and they would end up with the shape of the person who was underground, who was in the hole. And it would be a very good representation of the person. You could see the teeth a lot of times. It was pretty good. But you would see them in the moment of death, in the throes of death. And it was horrific. It was incredible to watch, to look at this. You could see dogs howling in pain. You could see mothers or parents and children huddled together with arms over the children at the moment of death. And I'm talking, this is just a horrific sight.
Yeah.
But I didn't bat an eye. I mean, my parents told me what it was, so I understood. And I wasn't upset and I wasn't scared. I was just amazed at the age of 5 of what I was looking at. And I'll never forget it. It's like not every child has an early memory of something so incredibly vivid and strong and powerful and bizarre. So, that's something about being in the Air Force, that things like that happen to people, to kids, where a kid in the United States in a hometown is never going to know an experience like that. So stuff like that, I think, really shaped me. I'm not sure for good or bad, but it made a real impact, these kind of things.
Yeah, and I think with military life as a whole and just, even life, things shape you and you don't necessarily know, like you said, if it's for good or for bad. And I think you kind of
Mm-hmm.
figure that out later on in life because I think you become so much more appreciative for what you
Mm-hmm.
have. And
Mm-hmm.
because we were military kids, we can stand here and say, okay, yes, my parent helped to make a difference and helped to give freedom. And so I think it's kind of a sense of pride that we can have because of it.
Well, yeah, I have to say I am proud to say that I was raised in the military, just because it was a very different upbringing and it was not the usual and ordinary, uh, which is kind of fun to be able to tell people, like, no, I don't have a hometown, but I did see a whole lot of the world. And
Yeah.
it's a little, it's kind of pride, a little pride in that I was able to experience this.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think my last thing I wanted to talk about as far as adventures was when we lived in England. I was about 12, and this was in the late 60s. And at that time, 1960s, in England and even the United States, but more so England, London, was going through a real change, and things were very mod and groovy, and there was new fashion with mini skirts and rock music and psychedelic drugs, and there was a lot of changes and a lot of fun things happening. And now, of course, I'm only 12. I'm not experiencing any of this, but the fact that we got to live there and occasionally go to London, I felt like I was sort of part of it, and I felt included in being like a 12-year-old hippie, which I wasn't,
Yeah.
because I was a military kid. But I got to experience the fun and the joy and the cool things that were happening, and like I was in the coolest place you could be at that time, and it was so awesome. Now, for anybody who's seen an Austin Powers movie, will know that there was, they did dress like that, and they did talk like that, and it was a rockin' time. And I got to be part of in a way, and it's such a fun memory of a couple years of just pure uh, fun. So that's something that these are experiences that I'm so glad I had, and I can only get them by my dad being in the military. So, for what I said about being sad about losing friends, this really balances it. These
Yeah.
experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we take the good with the bad, and
Hmm.
we to successfully, well, I won't even say successfully, but to go through this military life and have as much fun with it as you can. I think you have
Right.
to realize that, okay, yeah, I'm going to get some bad times. I'm going to get some times that are just hard, but
Hmm.
it's going to come with so many good moments and memories. And even though, uh, yeah, XYZ is going to suck, but I know I'm going to be
Right.
able to be moving somewhere. I'm going to be able to explore a new area. I'm going to make new friends, no matter how hard it is. And so it's really about finding the joy within it.
Right. Yeah. If you can. Yes. Yeah. I really enjoy talking about it because it just kind of brings the feeling back of the newness of everything, the differentness of everything, and how interesting that was.
Yeah.
When we lived in England, over the years living in different countries, I learned stuff that I you just didn't know in America at that time. Like, not
Yeah.
everybody loves Americans. We are not like loved worldwide. And I was like, oh, you don't like us? I thought everybody loved us. I thought everybody
Yeah.
loved us. Maybe not so. And
Yeah.
I had an English girlfriend that I went over to her house for a meal, and it was tea. And that is a light meal in the afternoon. And it was a family with 7 children, and they didn't have a lot of money. And we all sat down and we had our tea. And we had at that time, and I don't know what it's like in England now, but back then, beans on toast was done all over. It was very popular in that country. That's one of their staples.
Yeah.
And so we had beans on toast, and I had my little bread with my beans, and I ate it, and I had my tea. And I guess I was 12, and I said, oh, can I have some more? Because I'm a stupid American. I just think there's always more. And the mom looked at me and she said, there isn't any. And I was just mortified that I had made such a faux pas like that, that I just had, put them in a position of embarrassment. And I was just like, oh, sorry, because as an American, I just always thought there was always more. you know, and
Yeah.
I realized like, oh, things are different, and not everybody is like us. They live a different kind of life.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Things like that. Yeah,
it's
learning things like
crazy.
that.
Yeah, we talk about the whole cultural well-rounded, and that's definitely part
Hmm.
of it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
so the last oh, go ahead.
hmm. No, no, I was just saying it. All in all, I'm so glad that I had the opportunity, that my parents made that decision to be in the Air Force.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last thing that I want to ask you is, what is a piece of advice that you would give to another military child?
I'm not sure I can do that because I was a military child so long ago and things are so different. I'm not sure I could give advice, um, except, like my lifestyle back then of trying to enjoy things that you don't normally have a chance to see would be one. But I have to go back, since I'm having the ability to be on a podcast and talk. I have to go back to, uh, if you have something that's making your life hard, difficult in any way, to please get help. And the two numbers I told before is what I would say is call one of those numbers and get whatever help you need for whatever your problem or situation is. I just wish as a 12-year-old, I had the opportunity to call one of those numbers. It would have been life changing. And so that's why I would say to anybody, military child or not, don't don't put up with it. At least get help, if for whatever help you can get, to tell somebody and let somebody know. I don't know if had the opportunity to put those phone numbers up on the screen with my pictures? If not, I want to give them one more time.
Yeah,
Can I do that? Okay.
Go for it.
Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, 988. National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. And that's really, my advice.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing what your life as a military child was like.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And for anybody who hears this, I hope you enjoyed hearing a little history lesson there about what it used to be like. I've had fun. Thank you, Gracie. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Grace of a Military Child and Life podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to give it a like, follow, and comment. Also, be sure to check out Instagram and Facebook at Grace of a Military Child and Life for more awesome content. For information on the podcast, Military Child Bigs and Littles, Go AMCL blog, or other resources, visit www.goamcl.org. You can also email me at Gracie, that's GRACIE @GOAMCL.org with any questions or comments. To be a guest on the podcast, you can schedule it at www.goamcl.org/schedule a podcast, all one word, or contact me via social media or email. Stay tuned for the next episode where another incredible story is shared.